Hi, this is Chris with Nightfall Audiobooks, and I have for you something a bit different today. Thrift Store Horror is my collaborator on the channel. I use them for resources on what to read next and how to get books that I'm missing. And in some cases, I'm tracking down the wrong book entirely because it's the UK release and I already have the United States release. Anyway, recommendation was 13 Tales of Horror by 13 Masters of Horror. This is a compilation novel. It's all short stories. I have not read this before, but it came highly recommended by Thrift Store Horror. So we have stories by R.L. Stine, Caroline B. Cooney, Christopher Pike, D.E. Atkins, A. Bates, J. Bennett, Carol Ellis, Diane Ho, Lael Littke, Sinclair Smith, J.B. Stamper, Ellen Emerson White, and Patricia Windsor. Half of these authors have worked with Scholastic and Point Horror in the past. This should be pretty fun. And we all know about R.L. Stine and Christopher Pike, right? Believe it or not, I haven't really read any Diane Ho, or Sinclair Smith, or Caroline B. Cooney, but I do have a Cooney novel in the works, so stay tuned for that. I will be reading one story from this compilation and then publishing that as its own episode. I'm going to use this book like glue. If there's any holes or gaps or weirdness going on in my schedule, I'll be using one of these stories to fill that void. Just something fun to do. So let's begin. If you would like to get in touch with me, you can write me an email, nightfallaudiobooks@gmail.com. I am also on YouTube at Nightfall Audiobooks. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the join button to show your support. I also have a Patreon page, patreon.com/nightfallaudiobooks. So tell your friends, tell your mom, tell whoever you think would like to listen to me narrate them a story. Thank you very much for listening, and let's begin. Welcome to a Nightfall Audiobooks production of Hacker by Sinclair Smith. Every time I get near one of these things, something goes wrong, Violet wailed inwardly as she stared at the computer monitor. Error, error, error flashed over and over again, demanding her attention. Nothing she did seemed to help, though, and Violet was getting discouraged and exasperated. She ruffled her short black hair and turned to peer out the classroom window. Rain was coming down in slanted sheets, spattering against the glass. There are a lot of other places I'd rather be on a night like this than a computer class at a broken-down community college. Still, her father had insisted. He thought it was important to learn about computers while you were still in high school. But at least there was one good thing about the class. There was Mr. Umberto, the teacher. Even though Mr. Umberto was too old for her, he'd probably been out of college for at least a year, she thought. He was fascinating. She gazed at the teacher standing in front of the room and sighed. He was absorbed in pruning a plant he had brought into the classroom. Mr. Umberto had told the class how much he loved flowers and indoor gardening, that plants had a special meaning for him. He even wore a rose in the buttonhole of his jacket every day. Violet thought this made him seem quite romantic and sensitive. She sighed again. If only the high school guys she knew were sophisticated like Mr. Umberto. Too bad, though. Thinking the computer teacher is fascinating isn't the same as thinking computers are. She looked at her Walkman with longing. Why not, she thought, glancing around the room. Everyone else was absorbed in practicing programming. Smiling, she slipped on the headphones and switched on some music. Violet kept her eyes glued to the computer screen as she tapped her fingers in time with the beat. Suddenly, an announcer broke in and interrupted the song with a special bulletin. Mr. Arthur Perez becomes the fourth victim missing and presumed dead in the ongoing series of bizarre disappearances that are leaving citizens terrified. Detectives on the scene believe the tragedy is once again the work of the serial killer who newspapers are calling Hacker. Violet sat up straighter. She had been following the case from the beginning, devouring every bit of information, mysterious disappearances, hardly any clues, and always a strange message found on the victim's home computer. Violet listened with rapt attention to the latest. Roses are red, violets are blue, sugar is sweet, toodaloo. This time the message had been signed, everybody's favorite cut-up. Violet shuddered. She didn't like having her name used in a killer's message. Killer. If they hadn't found the bodies, what grisly clues were the detectives refusing to divulge that made them believe the victims had been murdered? And why did the killer choose only victims with home computers and leave a message? Imagine, the victims' computers had stored the death threat messages for who knows how long. Maybe long after the victims themselves were gone. She gazed at the screen glowing in front of her as she eased off the headphones and turned off the Walkman. Problem? Someone whispered. Violet turned quickly, startled, and looked up into Mr. Umberto's face. She hadn't heard him come up behind her. How long had he been standing there, she wondered. I just don't seem to get these things, Violet laughed nervously. You know, you're allowed plenty of practice time after class, which I've noticed you don't take advantage of, he said rather sternly. Suddenly, Violet felt defensive. This wasn't my idea. If I had to take a night course after school, I'd rather take something fun like painting. This is boring. Besides, it's not like we're getting graded anyway. This course is supposed to be for our own interest, and frankly, I'm not interested. She stopped suddenly as a flicker of annoyance froze on Mr. Umberto's face. He continued staring down at her, fingering the flower in his lapel. Oh no, it's that temper of yours again, she scolded herself. Rudeness was Mr. Umberto's pet peeve, and the only thing that really made him angry. I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. I didn't mean to be rude, she stammered. I was planning to come in and practice. I guess I've just been procrastinating. It's a character flaw of mine, I guess. She finished looking down at her hands. To her surprise, Mr. Umberto threw back his head and laughed. How could I have said those things to him, she asked herself, looking at his thick black hair and twinkling dark eyes. I think you're being too hard on yourself, Violet. Let's not say procrastination is a character flaw. Let's just call it a bad habit. We all have those. Do you know what mine is? Mr. Umberto asked confidentially. Violet shook her head. Everyone thought Mr. Umberto was so clever, so good-looking, and so much fun to talk to. What bad habit could he possibly have? I'm a terrible practical joker, he confessed. I have to watch myself all the time, because once I get started, I just can't stop. He laughed again, and Violet laughed along with him. Tell you what, though, I wish you'd give computers another chance. I find them so very interesting. Then I do too, Violet almost blurted out. Then and there she vowed to practice on the computer and to impress Mr. Umberto. Why not start tonight, she thought later as she watched the other students leave. Violet hesitated. She had turned off her computer, and she already had her coat on. I'm going to stay, Violet told herself firmly. She took off her coat and sank into the chair in front of her terminal. Then she sat motionless for a few moments, staring at the screen and twisting a piece of hair at the back of her neck. I could just get a candy bar and come back, she thought, as she logged onto the computer. Suddenly, she felt very hungry. The prompt appeared on the screen, asking for her password. Impulsively, Violet closed her eyes, typed a few keys at random, pushed back her chair, and stood up. I'll have to start all over when I come back, she sighed. Oh well, let's go get that candy bar. You're still procrastinating, she told herself as she headed down the deserted hallway toward the vending machines. It looks like nobody stayed around, she thought, feeling a little uneasy. She kept glancing over her shoulder, hoping she'd see someone, but the whole floor looked deserted. On the way back to the room, she stopped to read the items on the bulletin board, and then stopped to check her makeup. About 15 minutes later, she forced herself back to the computer. Okay, let's get started, she muttered as she entered the classroom. But as she approached the terminal, she realized something was wrong. There was a message on the screen. As Violet read it, she felt an uneasy stirring in the pit of her stomach. The message. It was a lot like the rhyme she'd been reading in the newspaper the past few weeks. Roses by the handful, violets by the bunch. Should I kill you after breakfast, or wait till after lunch? Tightening her hands into fists so tight the knuckles whitened, Violet backed stiffly away from the screen. That's the kind of message Hacker writes, she thought, trembling. And then she ran. She didn't stop running until she reached the lobby. Thoughts were racing through her terrified mind. Was it a message for me? But why would he send me a message here? The place was full of terminals, with several people using them each day. Then another thought flashed into her mind, bringing her up short. She had closed her eyes when she typed in her password. She pressed her hand to her throat as a realization hit her. Somehow, I've tapped into the hacker's computer and found a clue. I've got to call the police. Shaking, Violet walked across the lobby to the row of pay telephones. With trembling hands, she fumbled for a coin. Just then she saw Mr. Umberto come striding across the lobby, pulling up the collar of his raincoat and whistling a tune. Mr. Umberto? Mr. Umberto, wait! Violet cried, rushing up to him as he pushed open the door. Mr. Umberto stopped and smiled. Violet, what are you doing here so late? Mr. Umberto, it's so incredible. I stayed to practice, but somehow I got a strange message on the screen. It wasn't mine. I think I pressed the wrong keys or something. I don't know. The message on the screen, it was the hacker's. I just know it. I must have accidentally entered his computer system. She quickly blurted out the rest of the story. Well, Violet, this is pretty amazing, said Mr. Umberto when Violet had finished. Then he eyed her suspiciously. Are you playing a joke on me? Violet gasped. A joke? About Hacker? About a murderer? How could anyone joke about that? Well, the world is full of practical jokers, I can tell you that. And I'll bet one of your classmates is playing a joke on you. In fact, I'm certain of it. But why are you so sure? Violet asked, confused. Because, Violet, replied Mr. Umberto gently, you aren't experienced enough to understand why breaking into someone's system by typing their password accidentally is such an improbable and practically impossible idea. Oh, Violet said softly, feeling a little foolish. I guess you're right. Of course I am, Mr. Umberto said confidently. Suddenly, Violet had another thought. But, Mr. Umberto, what if the hacker sent the message to me? Mr. Umberto chuckled. Don't let your imagination run away with you, Violet. Trust me. Someone just played a joke on you. And don't worry. Everything I've heard on TV or read in the papers says that a hacker always contacts his victims on their home computer. You don't even have one, so you can take it easy. Mr. Umberto paused and glanced at his watch. Shoot, I've got to go. I mustn't be late. Good night, he said abruptly. Then he was gone. Good night, Violet called after him, feeling suddenly drained. She collected her things and left the building. She always hated walking down the narrow, winding path that led from the computer building. It was flanked on either side by tall trees tangled with overgrown shrubs. Lately, she was sure she'd heard someone hiding there. Tonight, she was sure someone was there again. Violet hurried all the way home, glancing over her shoulder at every noise. A feeling of dread knotted the pit of her stomach, and she had the eerie sensation that she was being followed. It's probably just that I've been thinking about the hacker case too much, she thought, as she reached her house and started up the walkway. The house was dark. What's wrong? She wondered, fidgeting nervously. Calm down. Maybe Dad got called away on business at the last minute. Violet sighed. Lately, it seemed like he was always having to go away on mysterious sudden trips. Well, he promised it wouldn't last much longer. As Violet started to put the key in the door, her breath caught in her throat. The door was open. She knew she had locked it carefully before she left. Her father was a fanatic about such things. If you find the door open, never, never go into the house alone, he had told her over and over. Her heart pounded. But what if something had happened to Dad? Panic seized her, and Violet gave the door a shove and lurched inside. She jumped as the umbrella stand fell to the floor with a crash. As she felt her way through the hall, she could hear the blood rushing through her head. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she could make out an unfamiliar light coming from the living room. It was a weird greenish glow. She forced herself to keep moving closer until she could make out its shape. She gasped as she realized what it was. It was a home computer. She bent down to read the message that lit up the screen. Surprise. Sorry, honey. I was called out of town at the last minute. I hope to be back soon, but I'm not sure when. Here's a present to keep you company while I'm gone. I'll call you. Love, Dad. Violet sank weakly into a chair. Great, she thought. A home computer of my very own. Just what I've always wanted. She frowned. The phone rang, startling Violet out of her thoughts. She jumped in her chair. Relax, she told herself, feeling silly. It's probably Dad calling you. Hi, is that you? Violet asked, but the voice on the other end was cold. A stranger. It's me. I guess you discovered me tonight. Now I've discovered you. It wasn't easy to find you, but I have my secret ways. Violet felt a chill run through her as the voice laughed. It was a soft, threatening laugh. Her fingers tightened on the receiver. Sorry I can't pay you a visit right now. Too many other appointments. There was that laugh again. I'll be in touch, though. I'll be seeing you. The caller hung up. Violet hugged herself in a panic. She wished she weren't alone right now. Someone was following me home. Whoever it was I've heard in the bushes outside the computer building. I knew I could feel someone there, and tonight they got here first and opened the door. That's how they found my phone number. Her heart pounded. She picked up the phone to call the police, but hesitated a moment before dialing. The voice had been really scary, but she remembered what Mr. Umberto had said about the world being full of practical jokers, and hung up. The call was probably a prank, she told herself. After all, like Mr. Umberto said, Hacker left messages on the victims' home computers. He didn't make threatening phone calls, at least as far as anybody knew. Violet walked through the house, carefully checking all the doors and windows, and locking any she found open. Then she went to bed, and tossed and turned until morning, drifting in and out of sleep. It's a good thing it's Saturday, Violet thought, when she awoke late the next morning, feeling exhausted. Finally, she got out of bed, padded over to the window, and peered out. The sky was a cold, steely gray. Nice day, she frowned. Then an oddly shaped package on the porch caught her eye. What on earth could it be, she wondered. She quickly threw on a robe and ran outside. The package was huge, at least 6 feet tall, she thought as she got close to it. It was wrapped in tissue paper, tied with a big red ribbon. She tore at the wrapping. It was a large flowering cactus. The blooms were brilliant red and orange. Violet felt puzzled but pleased. What an odd sort of gift. The florist must have delivered it while I was still sleeping, she realized. After searching unsuccessfully for the card, Violet gave up and tugged at the plant inside. She had just finished placing it in the corner of the dining room and was admiring her handiwork when the phone rang. "Dad?" she said happily, grateful for the sound of his voice. They chatted for a few minutes about nothing in particular, and then Violet forced herself to sound casual as she asked him, "Hey, Dad, did you have anything delivered to the house? Like a cactus?" "A cactus?" Her father sounded surprised. "Yes, I just brought it inside. It has flowers on it." "Better phone the florist first and find out what's going on. Maybe it belongs to somebody and it's lost, or maybe you've got a secret admirer with unusual taste," her dad chuckled. "Bye, hon. See you in a week or two." Violet hung up and stared at the cactus. "I can't call the florist because I don't know which one it is. There was no card and no name on the wrapping." "Well, what could be so dangerous about a cactus? Maybe it is from a secret admirer," she laughed at herself. "I'd much rather have had flowers." At the next class, Violet mentioned a strange phone call to Mr. Umberto. "I think you were smart not to fall for it, Violet. Whoever it was will probably get tired of his little joke and stop bothering you now," he told her. He was right. 2 weeks went by, and there were no more phone calls and no more messages. Violet put the whole thing out of her mind and went on trying to improve her computer skills to impress the teacher. To her surprise, she began enjoying herself. She even became a member of a computer bulletin board and began to spend hours in front of her terminal at home, chatting with other members. She was preparing to do just that one evening, but decided to check her email messages first. One of them nearly scared her to death. "Hi, I told you I'd be in touch. I like to be friends. Most of my friends disappoint me, though, by going to the police. You know what happens then. You read the papers. So here is a test to see if I can trust you. My next victim is going to be Mr. Brown, but don't go to the police because I'm always watching you." Violet sat staring at the screen for a moment, frozen with fear. Then she forced herself to go to the phone. She had to tell the police what she had seen. But just as she was about to dial, she stopped. "Wait a minute," she said to herself. "If I tell the police that the next victim is going to be Mr. Brown, they'll think I'm crazy. There have to be hundreds of Mr. Browns in the phone book. This has to be a joke." The next few hours were torture for Violet, as she argued with herself, unable to decide whether or not to call the police. "It has to be a joke. What if it isn't? You're being foolish. What if something happens? You've got to call the police. What if he's watching you?" Finally, feeling completely exhausted, Violet called the police and told them what she knew. A detective who sounded very weary assured her that messages like the one she had received had so far turned out to be pranks, and they had gotten hundreds of reports. Still, they thanked her and assured her they'd check it out. As Violet hung up the phone, she thought she saw something outside her window. A face? No, she told herself, feeling much calmer now that she had called the police. "You've been so upset. It's only your imagination." "I know it was probably a trick, but I felt I had to tell the police," she told Mr. Umberto the next time she saw him in class. "They didn't seem to mind. In fact, they said I did the right thing." "Well, then, I guess you did, Violet. It's always good to be on the safe side, I suppose." That night, Violet had other things in her mind besides the hacker case. It was the last class, and that meant Mr. Umberto would be leaving town soon. He told the class he was going away, and he didn't say where. Violet was the only one who stayed after class. She hoped that he would say something, maybe tell her where he was going, but he had just gone to his office. "You're being silly," she told herself, looking around at the empty classroom. "Just go home." Suddenly, she sat up straight and blinked at the screen. "You have mail" was flashing in front of her eyes. Email, she thought excitedly. Maybe Mr. Umberto had decided to send her a message. She punched a few keys to close the file she was working on, typed in mail, and hit return. "You have one message" sprang up on the screen. Violet hit return and waited. She froze as a message appeared. "I know you went to the police. I saw you make the call. Too bad. Daisies in the garden. Posies on your grave. When you're falling out the window, don't forget to wave. I'm right behind you. I'm right behind you. I'm right behind you. I'm right behind you." Violet sat still as if hypnotized while "I'm right behind you" filled the entire screen. Then she stood up slowly and began backing away. She was afraid to turn around. The classroom door slammed shut behind her, followed by the sound of running feet in the hallway. Violet drew in her breath sharply and listened, straining to hear the smallest sound as the thud, thud, thud faded farther and farther away, growing fainter and fainter. She didn't know how long she stood there in the silence, or what snapped her out of the trance she was in, but finally she snatched her coat and her purse and ran from the room. She was going to find Mr. Umberto. His office door was open, she saw from the stairs. Yet when she reached the room at the end of the hallway, no one was there. The computer was on, though. Every teacher's office had one. She started toward it curiously when she felt a hand on her arm. "Looking for something?" "Oh," squeaked Violet, "I was looking for you." "And here I am," Mr. Umberto smiled. He looked strange, Violet thought, not himself, but she was about to begin her story when something stopped her. Something she saw on his computer that made her voice freeze in her throat. She couldn't stop staring. Mr. Umberto followed her gaze to the terminal where, "I'm right behind you," still lit up the screen. "So you see," he said slowly, "someone need not be right behind you to send you a message saying that they are. That's the beauty of computer communication. I see you found me out." Violet looked around the room frantically, gasping in disbelief as she saw the entire wall covered with newspaper clippings about Hacker. On some of them were drawn little smiley faces. "Why?" she whispered. "Why?" Mr. Umberto smiled, then twirled the flower in his lapel. When he spoke, Violet had the eerie sensation of listening to a TV advertisement for a product, like mouthwash or a tummy toner. "Well, don't look so glum. You know, I used to be an old gloomy Gus myself, a regular party pooper," he chuckled. "People looked at me and you could almost feel them saying, 'Uh-oh, here he comes.'" Mr. Umberto shrugged. "People were rude to me, and it really got me down. But now I know how to chase those blues away." He patted the computer terminal. "The computer tells me what to do. As long as they've got a computer, I can put them in their place." He paused and gazed fondly at the rubber tree in the corner of the room for a moment. He turned back to Violet. "And do you know the wonderful simplicity of it all?" he asked, raising his eyebrows. Violet shook her head helplessly. "No matter what the problem, and no matter what computer, any old one will do, the answer is always the same. Nasty neighbor getting you down? Eliminate him. Snubbed by the in crowd? Get rid of them. Now, when snubs and slights from rude waiters and salespeople, or students, put me in a bad mood, I do something about it. Now I'm so cheerful my social calendar is always full." Mr. Umberto looked thoughtful and knitted his brows. "I suppose I shouldn't keep doing it, killing people after I leave a message on their computer." Then he laughed. "Maybe I could send them a fax." "But what if someone puts you in a bad mood and they don't have a computer?" she squeaked. Mr. Umberto waved his hand lazily and looked at her as if he couldn't imagine such a silly question. "Well, that's no problem. I just pick out someone who does. Anyone will do, really. It all balances out." Now, Violet realized a new terror. He seemed to really believe that there was logic in what he was saying. Violet was paralyzed with fear. Mr. Umberto was smiling broadly, obviously pleased with himself. "If you're the hacker, then what do you do with the bodies?" she asked weakly. Mr. Umberto's eyes twinkled. "I put them in potted plants, however many it takes. Say it with flowers, that's my motto. And of course, there's the added advantage that they're always guaranteed flowers on their grave. Well, for part of the year anyway. Of course, I can't use flowering plants exclusively. You can see how impractical that would be. Most of them are just too small. So I use a few flowering plants and throw in a couple of rubber trees or maybe some potted palms. It makes for a nice arrangement." Violet felt horror overtaking her. He was completely, utterly insane, she realized. She had been edging toward the door slowly as he spoke, but her knees felt almost too weak to hold her. Now, in a burst of energy, she flew out the door and raced down the steps. She could hear Mr. Umberto's crazy laughter following her down the hall. She reached the main lobby running so hard people turned around, startled, and stared at her. She heard Mr. Umberto calling after her, "Violet, wait, wait!" She paused for a moment, out of breath, and aware that she was safe in a lobby filled with people. Still, she backed away warily as the teacher moved toward her. Suddenly, he stopped in front of her and doubled over with laughter. He laughed so hard tears were running down his cheeks. "Can't you take a joke?" he grunted out between spasms of laughter. Violet stared in surprise. This made Mr. Umberto start laughing all over again. "You should see the look on your face," he gasped. "You fell for the whole thing. This is one of the best gags I've ever pulled." Finally, he straightened up and contained himself with difficulty. "That day in class, when you were kind of rude, I saw that you stayed to practice, and I thought I'd play a little joke on you. When I saw you walk away, I couldn't resist going over and typing a message on your screen. But when you came back, you got so scared I couldn't believe it. And then when you thought you'd actually gotten into Hacker's system, well, it was just too much." Once again, Mr. Umberto was seized with a laughing fit. He squeezed the flower in his lapel, and a stream of water shot out and squirted Violet in the face. "Say it with flowers, that's my motto," he shrieked. She jumped back, flabbergasted. She couldn't believe that a grown man could act this way. Mr. Umberto looked like an immature, bratty little boy laughing over a dirty trick. "You're ridiculous," she snapped, and strode out the door. Mr. Umberto's laughter echoed in her ears. "Well, I guess the joke's on me, all right," she thought angrily, as she strode down the path that led from the building. But something nagged at her, something that wouldn't let her walk away. "I don't believe him," said a little voice inside her head. "I did everything he could to make me believe this was all part of a big joke, but he's lying. I just know it." Violet slowed her steps. Looking around to make sure Mr. Umberto wasn't behind her, she left the path and cut into the tangle of trees and shrubs. Her thoughts were racing. Of course, she thought, those poems Hacker sends to his victims. They're not like death threats anyone would take seriously. They're more like jokes. In a few moments, Violet saw Mr. Umberto leave the building, laughing to himself. When he got in his car and drove away, she went back inside. Soon she was back in the computer room, sitting in front of a terminal. There was a way to prove that Mr. Umberto was the hacker, if she could do it. She was going to have to get into his computer system for real this time, and now she had learned enough to know how difficult that would be. "I've got to find out the secret password he uses somehow," she told herself desperately. It could be anything, she knew. Think. People often use a word that means something special to them, such as a pet's name or, of course, a favorite flower. The prompt appeared on the screen, asking for the password, and Violet typed in orchid. Incorrect password appeared on the screen. She tried using just plain flower this time. Incorrect password. For the next half hour, Violet typed in all the names of flowers and plants she could think of with no luck. "What's the matter with me?" she thought suddenly. "I haven't tried the most obvious one of all." Hurriedly, she typed in roses. "Roses are red, violets are blue," appeared on the screen. She'd gotten into the system. Next, she typed dir and hit the return key. A directory of all the files in the system appeared on the screen. Working quickly, Violet began to read the one labeled Hacker. One by one, rhymes she had seen in the newspaper articles about Hacker appeared before her eyes. Finally, Violet came to a new message she hadn't seen in the papers yet. It was followed by a name and computer address. "Roses and ribbons, violets and lace. It's tough to breathe with a pillow on your face." The message was for a Mr. Bart Brown. Hacker could be on his way to Mr. Brown's house right now, Violet thought in a panic. Then she had an even worse idea. He could have visited Mr. Brown already, sometime earlier. She didn't want to think about that. Violet rushed to type a message of her own for Mr. Brown. "I'm giving you a chance to save yourself, but you'd better hurry. I'm coming to kill you. Hacker." She typed send, then made a hard copy of the hacker's file and put the paper in her purse. This time, she had a real clue for the police. It was several weeks before Violet was able to get to her computer again. The police had caught the hacker hiding near Mr. Brown's home 2 days after she showed them the copy of the file she had made. It was Mr. Umberto, all right. He confessed to everything. The bodies were right where Mr. Umberto told her they'd be too, in potted plants. Mr. Brown told the police that he had received Hacker's rhyme but had assumed it was a joke. When he received the message Violet had sent, however, he became alarmed and contacted his local precinct. Thanks to Violet, Mr. Brown was unharmed. In the course of the investigation, detectives were able to piece together something of Mr. Umberto's, Hacker's, strategy. He'd bury a body in various potted plants, and then send one of the plants to a few of his next intended victims. Following that theory, they were able to track down all of the missing bodies. They found the remains of Arthur Perez in Mr. Umberto's private greenhouse, in the rubber tree in his office, in several potted geraniums at Bart Brown's house, and underneath the flowering cactus in the corner of Violet's dining room. This has been a Nightfall Audiobooks production of Hacker by Sinclair Smith. Hi, this is Chris with Nightfall Audiobooks, and thank you for joining me for my production of Hacker by Sinclair Smith. I don't know when this short story was written. It looks like Mr. Umberto, or Hacker, was using the school's computer system to do all his crimes, which was completely ridiculous. Why would you commit such a heinous crime using the school's resources? He's an instructor. He can't afford his own computer system. It is extremely unlikely that Violet would ever be able to hack into Hacker's system on campus just by guessing that the password is roses. However, once she did, she realized that Mr. Umberto was really Hacker. They found all the dead bodies thanks to her, and then she even prevented Bart Brown from dying. So that's nice. I don't know. I'm a computer guy. I've been doing computers for almost 30 years now. I can take this one a little more grain of salt than the usual horror stories, because I understand how computers work and how unlikely this entire scenario is, and even with suspension of disbelief, I'm just not buying it. I don't think that a novice that's been playing with computers for a couple of months is able to achieve something like this. She'd have to know the IP address of hacker, she'd have to try to get in on purpose, at least know his sign-on credentials, and she didn't brute force her way in, she just guessed, and that's not possible. There's no way he would use such a silly password. I would like to read a Sinclair Smith story that does not deal with computers, and go from there. So what should I read next? I don't know. Send me an email, nightfallaudiobooks@gmail.com. I'm also at home right here on YouTube at Nightfall Audiobooks. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and hit the join button to show your support. Any help is greatly appreciated. I really do mean that. I also have a Patreon page, patreon.com/nightfallaudiobooks. So tell your friends, tell your mom, tell whoever you think would like to listen to me tell them tales of horror. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you next time.